Chapter 1. The Spear in the Ashes. The world was harsh, unforgiving, and utterly alien. Jason had long since lost count of the days he'd spent stumbling through the barren, jagged wasteland beneath the blood-red skies of this forsaken planet. The twin suns, cruel and relentless, beat down upon him with unyielding intensity, casting long, twisted shadows over the cracked surface of the shattered rocks and scorched earth. The air was thick with a choking blend of sulfur and dust, stinging his lungs every time he inhaled and leaving a bitter taste in his parched mouth. His skin, once pale and unblemished, was now a mottled map of sunburn and bruises stretched tight over his gaunt frame. Each step he took was a testament to endurance, a defiance against the merciless environment that seemed determined to erase all traces of life from this planet's surface. The wreckage of their transport ship had become nothing more than smoldering shards and twisted metal fragments scattered across the jagged cliffs miles behind him. His crewmates had vanished, swallowed by the endless crimson expanse or lost to the chaotic storms that had raged in the hours after their catastrophic descent. Jason was alone, a solitary figure against a backdrop of desolation, armed with nothing but his wits and a fading hope. His supplies had dwindled to almost nothing. The ration packs were gone, and the water pouches empty. His only solace was the faint, flickering fire he had managed to kindle with trembling hands, a small beacon against the cold, endless night that crept in with the setting of the twin suns. Crouched near the fire, he sifted carefully through the layer of ash and dirt that had settled in the rocky crevice he had claimed as temporary shelter. His fingers, cracked and bleeding from the unforgiving terrain, brushed against something solid, something that had endured far longer than the fragile spark of human life struggling here. It was a spear, half buried in the dust, its shaft a splintered relic of ancient wood, blackened and worn, while the tip gleamed faintly with the dull, eerie glint of metal corroded by centuries of exposure. Jason's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary spear. It bore the marks of craftsmanship, of a civilization that had once thrived, long before this place had fallen silent and lifeless. A tool and a weapon, preserved against time and ruin, holding secrets buried beneath layers of ash and forgotten history. As he grasped the spear, the rough, uneven texture biting into his palms, Jason's mind raced with thoughts. The last piece of meat he had scavenged from the remains of a strange creature earlier that day now hung skewered on the spear's jagged tip, roasting slowly over the fire. The aroma was faint but precious, a promise of nourishment, a fleeting taste of survival in a world that offered nothing but hardship. He closed his eyes for a moment, the crackling flames warming his chilled skin, the faint crack and hiss of cooking meat filling the otherwise oppressive silence. For a brief instant, he allowed himself to feel safe, to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could endure this nightmare. Then, without warning, the voice came. It was low, cold, and utterly devoid of compassion, a whisper from the darkness behind him, slithering through the smoke and silence like a predator closing in on its prey. Now your species is on the menu. Jason's blood turned to ice. His heart slammed wildly against his ribs as he spun around, spear still in hand, eyes searching the shadowed wasteland. The fire's flicker cast grotesque shapes against the jagged rocks, but he saw nothing. No figures, no movement. Only the oppressive emptiness of the alien night. Yet the voice had been real, unmistakably close and terrifyingly clear. The realization crashed over him with a brutal finality. The planet was not as deserted as he had believed. There were watchers in the shadows, predators lurking beyond the fragile safety of his firelight. And now, he was their prey. His mind raced as he gripped the spear tighter, muscles coiling instinctively for the fight he had no choice but to face. The silent, eerie expanse that had seemed so empty moments ago now felt alive with unseen threats. Jason understood that this spear was more than just an ancient tool. It was a key to survival, the only weapon standing between him and whatever horrors prowled the darkness beyond the flames. He forced himself to steady his breath, to quiet the rising panic that clawed at his chest. The firelight danced on the worn wood and rusted metal of the spear, and in that faint glow, he saw not just a relic, but a challenge, a lifeline cast to him across the ages by some long-lost hand, urging him to fight, to endure, to live. For whatever waited in the shadows was hungry, and now, so were they. The desolate planet had never welcomed him, but the spear whispered promises of ancient battles fought beneath these same burning skies, of creatures and warriors who had once walked these scarred lands and wielded similar weapons against threats that had come before. Now, the cycle was turning once more, and Jason found himself cast into the role of the hunted, forced to answer the silent, brutal question that hung heavy in the sulphurous air. Who would survive this night? The ancient hunters, or the last, desperate human clinging to life at the edge of extinction? As the twin suns finally dipped beneath the horizon, plunging the world into a suffocating darkness, Jason raised the spear high, its shadow stretching long and sharp against the red rocks. The voice behind him was silent now, but the threat remained, unseen, waiting, eternal. With a grim determination burning in his chest, Jason prepared to face the night. The spear was his only hope, and the firelight the last barrier between him and the unimaginable hunger that stalked the alien wastes. Survival was no longer just a matter of will, it was a matter of fight, of cunning, and of ancient strength awakened by the echo of that whispered threat. Now your species is on the menu. Jason's fingers trembled as he tightened his grip around the spear's ancient shaft, feeling the grooves and splinters scrape against his skin, a tactile connection to a past he could barely comprehend. This weapon, aged and battered, seemed almost alive under his hands, a remnant of an ancient struggle long vanished into the dust of forgotten time. It whispered stories without words of savage battles, of desperate hunts beneath alien skies, of creatures and warriors locked in a brutal dance of survival that echoed through the ages. And now, here he was, a lone human stranded in the middle of that very same dance, the last fragile thread of a species that had ventured far beyond its cradle, only to find itself prey on a hostile world. The meat sizzling on the spear gave off a faint, almost primal scent, smoky and raw, but nourishing. For a moment, the smell was almost comforting, a reminder of the familiar despite the alien horrors pressing in from every direction. Jason's stomach growled painfully, a gnawing hunger that had become a constant companion ever since the crash. Food had become a luxury long forgotten, replaced by the more immediate need to survive another day, another hour, another desperate moment of breath and heartbeat. But the voice lingered in his mind, its cruel, cold warning sending icy dread curling down his spine like the creeping shadow of death itself. Now your species is on the menu. The words echoed relentlessly, repeating like a grim mantra, a sentence that transformed the very nature of his existence here from mere survival to something far more urgent, far more terrifying. Jason's eyes darted toward every shifting shadow cast by the fire's flickering flames, every jagged rock and twisted tree silhouetted in the crimson glow. The barren landscape stretched on endlessly, a wasteland of sharp edges and broken dreams. Yet the silence between the whispers of wind and the crackle of fire was heavy with menace, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on him with unseen hands. The night wasn't empty. The planet wasn't abandoned. Something watched, something patient and ruthless, something that had learned to wait for the perfect moment to strike. He forced his muscles to relax, forcing steady breaths that burned his lungs with each inhale. The spear became more than just an ancient artifact now, it was a promise, a symbol of defiance against the encroaching darkness. He shifted his weight slightly, planting his feet firmly against the hot, uneven ground, trying to convince himself that he wasn't alone in this nightmare, that he could fight. He had to fight. From the edge of the firelight, shadows seemed to gather and writhe, shifting as if alive. Jason's heart hammered harder, but his hands did not waver. Instead, he slowly raised the spear, angling the jagged tip toward the blackness beyond the circle of fire. His senses stretched to their limits, every sound, every movement, every breath of the alien night registered in sharp detail. Somewhere, just beyond his sight, a faint rustle betrayed the presence of something large, something stalking, patiently closing the gap. Memories of Earth flickered through his mind, fields of green grass under soft blue skies, the laughter of friends and family, the endless ocean tides he would never see again. Those comforts were gone, replaced by a barren Hell's Cape where every moment could be his last. The spear in his hand was now a lifeline thrown across the chasm of fear and despair, a reminder that humanity's primal instinct to survive still burned deep within him, even on this desolate, alien rock. Suddenly, a movement caught his eye. A shadow detached itself from the darkness and stepped into the firelight, just for a fleeting instant. The creature was unlike anything Jason had ever seen, towering and sinewy, with skin that shimmered faintly like cracked obsidian and eyes glowing an unnatural, piercing yellow. Its form was both graceful and terrifying, every inch a predator designed for killing. The creature's gaze locked with Jason's, a silent acknowledgement that the hunt had begun. Jason's breath hitched as the creature crouched, muscles coiling like a spring ready to unleash. The spear felt heavy in his hands, yet also strangely empowering, as if the weight of history and survival itself had been passed down to him in this moment. Time seemed to stretch, the fire's crackle growing louder in his ears, heartbeats thudding in the space between seconds. The alien beast shifted forward, a low guttural growl vibrating from deep within its throat, a clear declaration of intent. Tonight, the predator had found its prey. But Jason was not ready to surrender. With a primal scream, he lunged forward, spear poised to strike, a human against a monster in a dance as old as life itself. The spear flashed through the air, carving a line of ancient defiance as the planet's forgotten echoes surged through his veins. The fight for survival had begun here, on a world where humanity was no longer the hunter, but the hunted. Chapter 2. The Hunt Begins. The night on the Scarlet Wasteland deepened into a suffocating darkness that seemed to swallow every last trace of warmth and hope. Jason's heart still hammered painfully in his chest, the echo of his desperate scream lingering faintly in the stillness as the ancient spear felt heavy and primal in his grip. The creature, the shadow of nightmare itself, had disappeared as swiftly as it had come, melting back into the obsidian folds of the alien terrain like smoke curling from a dying fire. But the fear it left behind was visceral and raw, a reminder that this world was not just a forgotten graveyard but a hunting ground. And in this game, the rules were brutal and merciless. The strong survived, and the weak were consumed. For hours, Jason sat motionless beside the dwindling fire, his gaze flicking anxiously between the dance of flames and the enveloping blackness beyond. Every rustle of wind, every distant howl, every crunch of stone beneath invisible feet sharpened his senses and tightened the noose of paranoia around his mind. He was no longer merely a survivor of a crash. He was now the prey of an ancient predator, one that had evolved and perfected the art of hunting in this harsh environment long before humans had ever dreamed of touching the stars. His thoughts spiraled, looping endlessly over what little knowledge he had of this place. The planet named Tarsus by its long-lost explorers was known only in fragmented archives buried in the deepest vaults of the Galactic Council. It was marked as a dead world, one stripped bare by cataclysmic wars, left to rot in the void for millennia. But Jason now understood that dead was a lie. Life thrived here still, but in forms so alien and lethal that humanity's feeble technologies and weapons were as toys against them. He shifted slightly, the spear's tip still glowing faintly from the firelight, its jagged edge catching the glint of distant stars overhead. Despite the spear's ancient appearance, there was a sharpness to it, a weight that spoke of craftsmanship and deadly purpose. It was a relic of a forgotten war, a symbol of the countless battles that had raged across these barren plains centuries ago. Jason wondered who had made it, what race had once used it to carve their dominion in this merciless place, and what had become of them. Were they the ancestors of the creatures now stalking him? Or were they long extinct, wiped out by the very predators that now hunted in the night? His mind was a storm of questions with no answers, haunted by the distant voice that had shattered the fragile quiet. Now your species is on the menu. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to run, to escape the suffocating trap of the rocky valley. But where could he go? The land stretched in every direction, an endless maze of jagged cliffs, sharp outcroppings, and deep chasms that promised death in every step. His only shelter was the faint glow of the fire, a fragile beacon that invited both safety and danger safe from the darkness, but visible to all who lurked beyond. He was a lone human on a planet that did not welcome him, and every moment of hesitation might be the last. The memory of the creature's eyes haunted him, their unnatural yellow glow, cold and unblinking, filled with a predatory intelligence that went beyond mere animal instinct. It had studied him, measured him, marked him as a worthy opponent or a helpless meal. The low growl that had vibrated from deep within its throat was a language older than words, a sound that transcended species and spoke of primal hunger and the relentless will to survive. Jason swallowed hard, the dryness in his throat refusing to ease as he gripped the spear tighter, feeling the raw, splintered wood cut into his palms. This weapon was all he had, a link to a time when battles were fought hand to hand, when survival depended on strength, cunning, and the will to fight for every breath. Hours dragged into the long, cold void of night, until the first pale light of dawn began to stain the horizon with muted hues of purple and gray. The twin suns, hidden behind thick clouds of swirling ash, promised a day just as brutal as the night. Yet with light came a fragile sense of hope, a momentary reprieve from the invisible dangers stalking in the dark. Jason allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply, his body aching from exhaustion and hunger. He tore a small piece of the cooked meat from the spear and ate it slowly, savoring the smoky flavor despite its toughness. The food was meager, barely enough to sustain him, but it was a victory, proof that he had survived another night. But survival was only the beginning. The planet's secrets were many, and the creatures that hunted in the shadows were only the first of his challenges. He needed shelter, a safe place to hide, and answers. What had brought him here? Why had the ship crashed? And more importantly, what did this place want with him? As he packed his meager belongings and prepared to move, a strange sensation crept over him, a prickling at the base of his neck, a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. It was a feeling that he was not alone, that unseen eyes were watching his every move, tracking him through the alien wilderness. His gaze swept across the horizon, searching for any sign of movement, any clue to the hunters lurking just beyond the edge of vision. For the first time since the crash, Jason felt the full weight of his isolation, the crushing knowledge that here, on this forsaken world, he was the hunted, and the hunter's prey was not just his flesh but the very essence of his species. The hunt had begun. The early light barely touched the horizon as Jason began his cautious trek away from the smoldering remnants of his camp. Every footfall was careful, deliberate, mindful of the brittle stones and sharp volcanic glass that littered the ground beneath his worn boots. The world around him seemed both ancient and alive, ancient in the sense of endless cycles of birth, decay, and extinction written into the red sands and blackened rock, alive in the eerie silence that felt thick with unseen life. The skies, veiled in a persistent, choking haze that filtered the weak sunlight into a dim, oppressive glow, stretched endlessly overhead, an eternal reminder that this world was a crucible of survival, not a sanctuary for weary travelers. Jason's mind churned with fragmented memories of the crash metal shrieking under stress, the violent jolt as the transport ship tore through the planet's atmosphere, the deafening silence that followed as everything went dark. How many of his crew had perished instantly? How many had vanished into the savage unknown? He had no answers, only the nagging, bitter taste of loneliness and the aching certainty that if he didn't find shelter soon, he too would join the growing ranks of the lost. His spear, a relic from an era he barely understood, rested heavily in his hands. The wood was rough and cracked, the jagged metal tip dulled, but still sharp enough to draw blood. It was a piece of history, a weapon of a forgotten people who had once roamed this world in a time when life thrived here, when the planet was not yet a hunting ground for creatures shaped by endless hunger and cruelty. Now, Jason was the last link in a chain of survival, holding this ancient spear as his only defense against the monsters that lurked just beyond sight, waiting for the moment to strike. His senses were hyper-alert. Every rustle of the brittle brush, every faint shifting of the wind carried the weight of threat. He had learned to move silently, to listen not just to sounds but to the spaces between them, to the subtle signs of life that hid beneath the planet's harsh exterior. His every step was a gamble against an unseen adversary, and his every breath was a whisper against the backdrop of an alien wilderness that did not welcome him. Hours passed. The sun climbed weakly in the sky, casting pale light through the thick sulfur clouds that churned and swirled like ghostly specters. The landscape was a maze of shattered rock formations, cracked plateaus, and deep crevices that yawned like wounds in the planet's scarred surface. In the distance, towering spires of blackened stone jutted into the sky, remnants of ancient volcanic fury that had shaped this hostile world over millennia. These natural fortresses offered potential refuge, but also dangers of their own. Jason's survival depended on careful judgment, choosing where to rest, where to hide, and when to move. He paused by a narrow ravine, its depths lost in shadow, the air inside thick with an unsettling stillness. The smell of burnt ozone and decaying minerals hung heavy here, a reminder of the planet's violent past. As he crouched to survey the area, a sudden movement caught his eye, brief, subtle, almost imperceptible. A flicker of shadow against the jagged stone. His heart pounded as he raised the spear instinctively, eyes scanning every crevice, every silhouette. The creature from last night was near. He could feel its presence, a predatory awareness that radiated like heat in the dry air. Jason's thoughts flashed back to the voice, the cold, cruel whisper that had shattered his fragile sense of safety. Now your species is on the menu. It was more than a threat. It was a declaration of intent. The creatures here were not mindless beasts. They were hunters, intelligent and relentless. Their evolution had been forged in fire and blood, sharpening their senses and instincts to deadly perfection. To them, humans were an exotic prey, an anomaly worthy of the challenge, and perhaps a delicacy. Jason realized with bitter clarity that he was not just fighting for his life, but for the survival of all humanity, if only in the tiniest flicker of hope. As the day wore on, Jason moved cautiously, seeking shelter in the skeletal remains of an ancient outpost half buried beneath the ash. The structure was a labyrinth of rusted metal beams and broken walls, relics of a long-lost civilization whose knowledge and technology had been consumed by time and neglect. It offered some protection from the harsh elements, and perhaps more importantly, from the watchful eyes of the hunters. Yet the shadows here were deep and filled with unknown dangers. Every creak and groan of the crumbling metal sent a jolt of adrenaline through Jason's veins. Inside the outpost, Jason's eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing faded symbols etched into the walls, warnings, or perhaps prayers from those who had come before. The alien script was indecipherable, but the urgency behind it was palpable. He touched one symbol lightly, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingertips, and wondering what fate had befallen these long-gone architects of this place. The spear at his side was a stark contrast to the advanced technology scattered in broken heaps around him, a reminder that survival was not solely about weapons or machines, but about resilience and will. As night approached again, the temperature dropped sharply, the twin moons rising with an eerie glow that bathed the landscape in ghostly silver. The predators stirred. Their movements were a sinister ballet, silent and coordinated, slipping through the darkness with lethal grace. Jason prepared himself for another night of vigilance, reinforcing his meager camp and sharpening the spear's jagged tip with a piece of broken metal scavenged from the ruins. Every sound, every whisper of wind, every distant howl was a reminder that the hunt was far from over. Suddenly, a distant roar shattered the stillness, sending a wave of primal fear crashing through Jason's mind. It was a call, a challenge, or perhaps a signal, and the shadows answered with a chorus of guttural snarls. The hunters were gathering, their ancient ritual of the chase unfolding beneath the alien stars. Jason knew then that his time was running out. To survive, he would have to become more than prey. He would have to become the hunter. The spear was no longer just a relic. It was his lifeline, his link to the fierce spirit of survival that had propelled humanity across the stars. As he gripped it tightly, the flames of his small fire casting long, dancing shadows across the cracked metal and scorched earth, Jason steeled himself for the coming storm. The planet of Tarsus was alive with hunger and death, and now it had marked him. With the weight of the past and the threat of the future pressing down, Jason understood the brutal truth. In this deadly game of predator and prey, only one could emerge alive. and the fight for humanity's future had only just begun. Chapter 3: Shadows in the Bloodred Night. The crimson sky darkened further, bleeding into an abyss of shadows that blanketed the world beneath Tarsus's twin moons. Jason's every sense was stretched taut like a bowstring, his muscles aching with exhaustion, but his mind razor-sharp with the acute focus of a creature forged by survival itself. The cold night air bit into his skin, carrying with it whispers of distant movements, soft rustlings, and the faintest crack of brittle stones shifting under heavy footsteps. He crouched low among the fractured ruins of the ancient outpost, spear gripped tightly in calloused hands, eyes scanning the shifting darkness for the faintest sign of his relentless pursuers. The hunt had escalated beyond the realm of simple survival. It was a savage ritual, an ancient dance between predator and prey that played out beneath alien stars in a cycle as old as the planet itself. Jason understood, with a cold clarity born of desperation, that these creatures were not mindless beasts but cunning hunters. Their intelligence was sharpened by countless generations of conflict and hunger. Their bodies and minds evolved to prey on all who dared trespass in their domain. They knew this world intimately, every shadow, every crevice, every breath of wind, and Jason was a foreign element, an anomaly to be eradicated. Despite his fear, a fierce determination burned within him. He was a human, a survivor of a species that had risen from primitive origins to conquer worlds, to unlock the mysteries of the stars. This spear, crude and ancient, was now his weapon, a talisman passed down from unknown hands across millennia, connecting him to a forgotten legacy of resilience and defiance. As he adjusted his grip, the weight of that legacy pressed down upon him not as a burden, but as a source of strength. The night stretched endlessly. Moonlight shimmered over jagged rocks and twisted metal, casting eerie reflections on pools of stagnant water. The silence was punctuated by distant growls and guttural calls, the language of the hunters weaving through the air like a venomous melody. Jason's breath came in slow, steady gasps, his eyes narrowing as he picked out shapes slipping between shadows, hulking forms moving with predatory grace. The beasts were closing in, drawn by the scent of vulnerability, by the faint flicker of the dying fire that marked his presence. Memories surged in waves, flashes of Earth's forests and oceans, the warmth of sunlight on his face, laughter shared with friends long gone. Those images fueled his resolve, reminding him of everything that was at stake. He was not just fighting for himself, but for the fragile hope of humanity, for the dream of a future beyond the endless void. Yet the stark reality was inescapable. On this savage world, beneath these hostile skies, he was alone, hunted, and the odds were merciless. Suddenly, a soft rustle came from the east. Jason's muscles tensed, spear poised for the inevitable strike. A shadow detached itself from the rocks, sleek and fluid, its eyes glowing with a cold, predatory light. It moved silently, a perfect blend of power and stealth, embodying the deadly grace of a creature born to hunt. The spear flashed in the moonlight as Jason swung with practiced precision, the ancient weapon cutting through the air with deadly intent. The creature snarled, dodging with a speed that defied comprehension, only to disappear into the darkness like a ghost. Jason's heart thundered, adrenaline flooding his veins. This was no longer a test of endurance, but a brutal game of life and death, a savage contest where every second counted and every mistake was fatal. The spear, jagged and worn, became an extension of his will, a sharp line of defiance against the overwhelming night. With every breath, he channeled the instincts of countless ancestors, the echoes of battles fought on distant worlds and forgotten battlefields. As the hunt dragged on, Jason realized the planet itself seemed to pulse with life, and ancient intelligence lurking beneath the surface, watching, waiting. The ruins whispered secrets in the wind, memories etched into stone and metal, telling tales of a civilization that had risen and fallen under the watchful gaze of these predators. The spear was a relic of that past, a symbol of resistance that now rested in his hands. He felt its weight not just physically but spiritually, a bond forged through time and blood. Hours blurred into an endless night, the creature's relentless pursuit testing the limits of Jason's endurance and courage. Each encounter was a lesson in survival. Every shadow could conceal death, every sound a warning or a trap. Yet, amidst the terror, a strange clarity emerged. Jason began to understand the rhythm of the hunt, the patterns in the predator's movements, the fleeting glimpses of their strategy. He was learning to think like them, to anticipate, to adapt. The spear, once a simple tool for roasting meat, had become his lifeline. It was a weapon, a shield, and a key to unlocking the brutal mysteries of this world. Jason's grip never wavered as he moved through the alien landscape, each step a declaration of defiance against the darkness. The hunt was far from over, but the man with the ancient spear was no longer just prey. He was becoming a force to be reckoned with, a flicker of humanity's indomitable spirit burning bright against the endless night. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Under Twin Moons. The twin moons hung heavy and silent in the blood-red sky, casting their cold, pale light across the shattered landscape of Tarsus, a world where time seemed to fold upon itself, and the past and present bled into one another like ink spilling on parchment. Jason stood at the edge of a jagged cliff, the ancient spear gripped tightly in his hands, its worn wood rough and splintered against his calloused palms, the jagged metal tip still stained faintly from battles long since past, yet as lethal as the day it was forged. Behind him, the ruins of the forgotten outpost whispered secrets in the wind, the ghosts of lost civilizations murmuring warnings that only the desperate could hear. The air was thick with tension, every breath a fragile thread stretched taut between hope and oblivion. He had come far from the broken wreckage where his journey had begun, from the desolation where he had first tasted fear and survival's bitter sting. The creatures that haunted the night were no longer distant shadows but relentless predators, their guttural growls and predatory eyes haunting the darkness like living nightmares. The voice that had first chilled his soul, the whispered sentence that turned his world upside down, echoed still in his mind, a relentless refrain. Now your species is on the menu. It was no mere threat. It was a promise, a reckoning written in blood and bone, a summons to the final dance between hunter and hunted. The weight of the spear was a constant, grounding him in the swirling chaos of this alien world. It was a relic of ancient wars, a symbol of defiance that had traveled through millennia to reach his hands. Its presence was a reminder that survival was not granted but seized, that the spirit of those who had come before him, their courage, their fury burned still within the fragile vessel of his flesh and bone. Jason inhaled deeply, the acrid scent of sulfur and scorched earth filling his lungs, and he steeled himself for what was to come. Before him stretched the valley, a shadowed expanse of jagged rocks and twisted metal, a labyrinth of death and despair, where the planet's true rulers prowled beneath the suffocating darkness. The predators were gathering, their numbers swelling like a tide of hunger and fury. Jason could hear their low, resonant calls, the language of a species born to hunt and kill, sharpened by countless generations of survival against impossible odds. This was no longer a solitary struggle. It was an all-out war for existence. Suddenly, the silence shattered. From the shadows emerged the towering figures of the hunters, sleek and sinewy, their bodies a deadly blend of muscle and shadow, eyes glowing with predatory light. They moved with terrifying grace, a perfect symphony of lethal intent. Jason's grip tightened on the spear as he faced them, the jagged tip gleaming defiantly in the moonlight. The ancient weapon was his only shield against the storm of death that approached. The battle that followed was a savage ballet of survival. Jason moved with a desperation born of instinct, the spear slicing through the air, a line of defiance against the encroaching darkness. The creatures attacked with brutal precision, their claws and teeth flashing in the pale light, their snarls a chilling chorus that echoed across the valley. Pain and exhaustion clawed at Jason's body, but he fought on, fueled by a fire deeper than fear, a fire of determination, of the unyielding will to live. Blow after blow was exchanged, the dance of death unfolding beneath the twin moons. The spear sang through the air, its jagged edge finding flesh and bone, drawing blood from the merciless hunters. Each strike was a testament to the spirit of a lone human standing against impossible odds, a defiant stand in a world that sought to consume him. The predators faltered, momentarily stunned by the ferocity of his assault, their numbers thinning as Jason pressed his advantage. But the cost was great. His body was battered, wounds burning with a fierce ache, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Yet he refused to yield. The memories of home, of the fragile beauty of Earth's green fields and endless blue skies, burned bright in his mind, a beacon guiding him through the storm. He fought not just for himself, but for the hope that humanity could endure, that even on a world ruled by shadow and death, the light of life could shine. As dawn's first light began to pierce the blood-red sky, the final echoes of the battle faded into silence. The valley lay quiet, the predators retreating into the shadows, broken and bloodied. Jason stood alone, the spear trembling in his grasp, a survivor against all odds. The planet of Tarsus was still a crucible of death, but in this moment, a fragile victory belonged to the last human. The voice that had once promised doom now seemed distant, a shadow fading in the light of dawn. Jason knew the fight was far from over, that the planet still held countless dangers and mysteries waiting to be uncovered. But he also knew this. As long as the spear remained in his hands, as long as his spirit burned bright, he would face whatever came next. For in the end, survival was more than a battle, it was a testament to the unbreakable will of life itself. The dawn light was slow to come, a creeping wash of muted grays and bruised purples that seemed to hesitate on the horizon, as if the very atmosphere mourned the night's brutal carnage. Jason's body was a canvas of pain and exhaustion, every muscle screaming with fatigue, every breath shallow and ragged. Yet beneath the physical torment, a fierce ember of victory burned deep within him, a stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. The spear in his hand, battered but unbroken, was a tangible link to that victory, an ancient symbol forged in fires long since died out, now wielded by a man whose story was no longer one of helplessness, but of defiance. The valley around him, scarred and silent, seemed almost reverent in the fragile light. The predators who had hunted him so relentlessly had vanished into the shadows, their howls fading into distant echoes. But their presence lingered like a dark stain on the land, a reminder that this was no safe haven but a battleground, a place where life and death entwined in an eternal dance beneath alien skies. Jason stood among the ruins, the wind carrying whispers from the forgotten past echoes of a civilization that had risen and fallen here, wiped away by time, war, and the insatiable hunger of these relentless hunters. Despite the crushing weight of solitude, Jason's thoughts reached beyond himself. He thought of Earth, of the stars that had guided humanity's dreams, of the fragile hope that had propelled his people across the void in search of new worlds. His journey had brought him here, to the edge of extinction, but it had also awakened something ancient within him, a primal will to survive that transcended flesh and bone, a spark that connected him to the countless souls who had fought and fallen before. The spear was more than a weapon. It was a testament, a bridge across time that bound him to a legacy of warriors who refused to yield. As he moved through the broken remnants of the outpost, Jason's mind raced with questions. What had become of the civilization that had crafted this spear? Had they too faced the monstrous hunters that now prowled these lands? Were they ancestors of the creatures that stalked him, or victims of a cruel twist of fate? The answers were buried deep in the planet's history, locked away in ruins and relics that whispered of glory and despair. Yet for Jason, the past was a distant shadow, the present demanded all his strength, and the future uncertain and fraught with peril beckoned like a distant star. Nightfall approached once more, swift and merciless, wrapping the world in a cloak of darkness, pierced only by the cold glow of the twin moons. Jason prepared himself for the inevitable return of the hunters, the relentless cycle of pursuit and survival that had defined his existence on this forsaken world. He reinforced his fragile camp with scavenged materials, his hands steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. The spear was sharpened anew, its edge gleaming with deadly promise. Every sound, every shift of shadow, was met with alert eyes and a heart pounding with fierce resolve. The hunt resumed under the ghostly light, a brutal game of cat and mouse played out on a stage of broken stones and twisted metal. The predators moved like shadows made flesh, their eyes burning with hunger and ancient malice. Yet Jason was no longer the helpless prey. He had become a hunter in his own right, learning the rhythms and patterns of the chase, anticipating the moves of his adversaries with growing cunning. The spear flashed in the moonlight, a line of defiance and survival cutting through the darkness. The final confrontation came like a storm unleashed. The valley echoed with the clash of flesh and metal, a cacophony of snarls, grunts, and the sharp, resonant ring of the spear striking true. Jason fought with a desperate fury, every strike fueled by the will to live, by the memory of Earth and the hope that still flickered faintly in his heart. The hunters were formidable foes, but their numbers dwindled beneath his relentless assault. The ancient weapon, a relic of forgotten wars, sang a song of survival in his hands, a fierce testament to the indomitable spirit of life. When the last shadow fell silent, and the valley lay still beneath the rising dawn, Jason stood alone amidst the ruins, a survivor against impossible odds, a man who had faced the abyss and refused to be consumed. The spear, stained and worn, remained in his grasp, a symbol of victory and the enduring will to endure. In the quiet aftermath, Jason looked to the sky where the twin suns began to burn away the lingering night. He knew the planet was still a crucible of danger, a realm where shadows waited to reclaim their dominion. But he also knew this. As long as he held the spear, as long as his spirit remained unbroken, he carried the legacy of humanity forward, a flicker of light against the darkness, a story of survival written beneath alien stars. The voice that had once whispered doom was now a distant echo, overtaken by the triumph of life and the unyielding will to endure. Jason's journey was far from over, but in this moment, he was no longer just a lost soul on a hostile world. He was a warrior, a survivor, and the living proof that even when the stars seem to turn cold and merciless, the flame of humanity can still burn bright. With a final, steadying breath, Jason turned away from the valley's edge, the spear a steady weight in his hands and a beacon guiding him onward into the unknown. The reckoning under the twin moons had passed, but the story of survival, the story of humanity's indomitable spirit, was only beginning.